Now that we have our pieces marked, we can go ahead and stitch them together, or pin them together for their first set of stitches. So we're going to be doing hand stitching, and you have the option of using your embroidery needles with floss or using sewing needles with sewing thread. For if you're going to use embroidery needles with embroidery floss, go ahead and just use one. Don't use more than 2 threads. If you need 2 threads just to be able to see it, go ahead and do 2, but 1 should be plenty. I'm going to go ahead and pin it together. Again, notice I prefer doing my pins perpendicular to the seam line, but you can also pin them out this way. It's really whatever works and whatever easiest for you. I don't like pinning this way because then I have more distortion with my fabric. For this project, you're not going to have much distortion, so it's not too big of a deal, but it's a good habit to get into, especially if you have an interest in sewing and creating garments or quilting. Go ahead and pin. Go do this one on the inside. I'm going to go ahead and do 5 pins. Again, if you feel more comfortable having your pins, like tons of them, go for it. But really 3 is probably plenty. I'm just doing 5 because, you know what, I'll just do 3 on this one to be a good demonstration of the differences. So next, we're going to go ahead and take our sewing needles or our embroidery needles, and we're going to thread them. So I have here sewing thread as well as embroidery floss. So just like when embroidering, you don't want your piece to be longer than 18 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this. It's just more likely to knot if you do something longer than that. And I'm going ahead and cut this. I have a ruler right off screen to make it easier to see. So because of the embroidery floss, I'm going to use 2 just so that it's easier to see on the video. You only need to use 1 floss, 1 thread within the floss. So because 2 threads together is easier to see, I'm using 2, but you don't need to use 2, you can use 1. Go ahead, thread my needle. And then thread my needle. Sewing thread as well. I've had a couple emails from students saying that it was pretty difficult to thread the needles, and I have to agree, at times it can be very challenging to thread these needles. Okay, so the difference we're going to do this time that we didn't do last time is that we are going to take our threads together and tie it in a knot, both threads together at the end. So just like here, and then I'm going to do the same for my sewing thread. So I'm going to sew one of these with just the stitching of the sewing thread, and the other one I'll do the embroidery floss, and you'll see it's the same thing. So I'm going to start by sewing this curved edge first. Doesn't matter because we have them placed. We have them pinned together with right sides together so that when the seam line is together and we open this up, we don't see the seam. Going to go ahead and start right at this bottom corner. And I'm going to do what's called a back stitch. This is what we did in our embroidery lesson. Remove this first pin. So the back stitch is that strongest stitch. And I'm keeping my back stitches pretty contained, probably about 2.5 millimeters or about centimeter. Let me see. What is that? About 0.5 centimeter. Wait, 5 millimeter. Yeah. I don't necessarily want them too long because every stitch that it comes together, it's just another place, an anchor point to reinforce the fabric. So I'm not using a hoop like we did before. I'm just holding this in my hand and I'm going down. See, we don't necessarily need the line on this side because we're going to focus all of our stitching on one side. Like so. And if I can figure out video editing, this part right here will be in fast forward. If I cannot figure out video editing, you can fast forward this probably about 30 to 45 seconds, maybe a little bit longer because it looks like I'm going to have to rethread my needle soon. I'm trying to keep my stitches pretty even in length. If you want to do very exact, you can make your hash marks in exact distances apart. And you'll also find it faster if you have multiple needles to prepare multiple needles at the beginning so that you don't have to have your stitches too interrupted. So I don't have a lot of thread left. So what I'm going to do here is go ahead and tie off this thread just like we did with embroidery. Except I'm doing it on the and then I'm going to thread a new piece. The thread color doesn't necessarily matter for this mask design because you shouldn't be able to see the thread on the outside. Okay. Bring my two ends together, knock over the camera.